This is part 3 of the notes from chapter 23, World War II in Georgia. Here are some facts about World War II that are not necessarily going to be on your test, but they are important for you to understand the overall um, idea of the war. First of all, there were lots of innovations: tanks, rockets, airplanes, paratroopers, aircraft carriers, more advanced submarines, radar, and sonar that allowed tracking of enemy ships, planes, and submarines. All these are innovations from World War II. We will talk, um, we'll watch some of the Ken Burns documentary about D-Day, but the basic facts are that on June 6, 1944, the Allied forces deployed 4,000 landing craft, 600 warships, 176,000 soldiers, and 11,000 planes, and landed on the beaches of northern France. The Allies pushed toward Germany from the west, and the Russians pushed towards Germany from the east. So Germany was sort of caught like in a pair of pliers between the Allies and Russia. Here's a picture of the English Channel right before the D-Day invasion. Here is a picture looking at the beaches on Normandy from the inside of one of the landing craft. This is from a day or two after June 6th, where you see all kinds of equipment moving inland. Back to information from the book. The Holocaust had been going on for several years. You saw in the documentary that as early as 1942, there were magazine articles like the Life magazine article about the brutality of the Germans, especially toward the Jews of Poland. But as British and American troops coming from the west and Soviet troops coming from the east were closing in on Germany, they began to discover Nazi concentration camps. Hitler's regime had killed over 6 million Jews, as well as 5 to 6 other million undesirables, for a total of 11 to 13 million in all. Hitler's final solution to what he called the Jewish problem was to kill them all. And at camps like Dachau, Auschwitz, Treblinka, and Buchenwald, that's exactly what the Germans tried their best to do. Here's a map that shows um, concentration camps and extermination camps. This is Bergen-Belsen. Here's Dachau, Auschwitz, and Treblinka. Both of those were death camps that were in Poland. Georgia's Jewish community dated to 1773, the earliest days of the colony. But they were very involved with Jewish refugees after the war. Some came to Atlanta, and as a result of the Holocaust, lots of American Jews came to support the idea of a Jewish homeland, which was very influential in the foundation of Israel in 1948. In 1996, the William Bremen Jewish Heritage Museum opened in Atlanta. It's the largest of its type in the South. If you're ever doing research on the Holocaust, this is one of the closest places for you to go and get some good research done. The war is coming to an end, but we've got the war in two parts of the world, in Europe and in Japan. Roosevelt dies in Warm Springs on April 12th of 1945. His vice president, Harry Truman, becomes the president. And less than a month later, Germany surrenders on May 8th, 1945. That's referred to as Victory in Europe Day. But before that and before Roosevelt's death, he, Stalin, and Churchill met at Yalta to talk about how to reorganize Germany once the war was over. And they decided that each part of Germany would be controlled by one of those countries, Great Britain, France, the Soviet Union, and the United States. Not long after the Yalta Conference, Roosevelt is in Warm Springs and has a massive cerebral hemorrhage and dies. This is a picture of the funeral. This is the new president, Harry Truman. The war ended on May 8th. The war in Europe ended on May 8th, 1945, when the Allies accepted the unconditional surrender of Nazi Germany. Hitler had committed suicide earlier when U.S. and Soviet troops were closing in on Berlin, and it became obvious that the end was near. This is a picture from Victory in Europe Day in Columbus, Georgia. I want you to see if you can figure out what that building is. We'll talk about it in class. This is Broad Street. That might give you a clue. I'm sure that lots of you have actually been in this building. Images from New York City on Victory in Europe Day. In the Pacific, things took longer. Up until May of 1942, the Japanese were advancing all over the Pacific, but the Battle of Midway, the Battle of the Coral Sea and the Battle of Midway were the first defeats of the Japanese Navy in 300 years. And after that, the Allies began to recapture Pacific Islands. They invaded the Philippines in 1944, and Great Britain invaded Burma. By 1945, there were daily air raids made on the Japanese home islands. Here's Hawaii, Midway, the Marianas, the Solomon Islands. Guadalcanal is in the Solomon Islands. In late July, the Allies issued the Potsdam Agreement, which calls for the unconditional surrender of Japan. The emperor was willing to surrender, but the foreign minister was not. So, in order to save American lives that would be lost if America had to invade Japan, Truman authorized the use of a new weapon, the atomic bomb. The first one was dropped on the city of Hiroshima. 80,000 people died, and 120,000 died in the next year or two. The Japanese still refused to surrender, so a second bomb was dropped on the city of Nagasaki on August 8th, and the Japanese surrendered on August 15th, 1945. Why did we drop the atomic bomb? In order to save American lives that would be lost if the U.S. had to invade Japan. There are a couple of pieces of national legislation that affected all citizens during and after the war. Income tax being held from a worker's paycheck and being sent directly to the U.S. Treasury was new during World War II. And the GI Bill made a huge, huge, huge difference to enlisted men coming back after the war. It provided low-cost loans to veterans and would pay for them to go to college. And what was going on in Georgia during World War II? Eugene Talmadge is elected governor again in 1940. There is a controversy because there were two instructors at Georgia Southern who said they had plans to integrate the college. Well, Talmadge had them fired. And when some of the members of the Board of Regents protested his interference, he got rid of them. Well, the accreditation, the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools, which is what gives a school its accreditation, refused to accredit Georgia's white colleges because of Talmadge's interference. We'll talk more about that in class. In 1942, Ellis Arnold defeats Talmadge for governor. He campaigned on restoring the university system's accreditation. He was definitely a reformer. He won back the accreditation. He created a civil service system. He led Georgia to become the first state to grant 18-year-olds the right to vote. He worked to reform the prison system, ended the poll tax, and led the fight for the entire South against unfair railroad rates. One of the things you're going to have to do on the test is put these 8 events in chronological order. We'll talk about them in class. We'll mix them up in practice. You're going to have to know the actual dates of the German invasion of Poland, the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, and the D-Day invasion. And that's it for Chapter 23.